Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm your host Conor O'Neill, joined today by Chris Beesley as we look back and pay tribute to Everton chairman Bill Kenwright following the news on Tuesday evening that he sadly passed away on Monday night. Chris, you were obviously at home yesterday enjoying a day off when this news broke. I was in the Echo office and reacting and reporting on the tributes that flooded in for Bill when the news was officially confirmed that he passed away. But as you were sat at home yesterday when the news come through, what was your feeling?
Yeah, we'd heard earlier in the day that it could be the case, so we had everything ready in time for the official announcement. It's end of an era, Everton Football Club. Absolutely no two ways about that. We knew that the chairman hadn't been in the best of health. It was the announcement that the club put out themselves a number of weeks ago, talking about the major procedure he'd undergone to remove a cancer, but obviously given his general state of health and his age, at the time they were hoping to say it would be a lengthy but hopefully a full recovery, but wasn't the case. And Monday night he'd passed away, and then obviously the official news came on Tuesday evening. It's terribly sad for all Evertonians and I think everybody within not just the sporting community, football community, but obviously the other loves of his life, the theatre and the arts, and so many people he knew in that. I mean, we can't sugarcoat that the last year of his life was obviously very difficult. I'm not even talking about health now. For what went on at Everton, the fact that he wasn't watching his beloved Everton on a regular basis, he'd spoken about that, how much it hurt. And no matter what you think of Bill Kenwright, I'm sure you can't deny it must have really hurt him a lot not to be going to those games. And it's been a tough year for all Evertonians. He'll have felt that more than anybody. The worst season in the club's entire 135-year history in terms of the points total that they took. The only saving grace was that that last day of the season they got the one goal to keep them up that they needed on that victory against Bournemouth. But yeah, so it was so sad that it had to end that way for both him and Everton. But Everton's longest standing administrator at the club, by far and away the most experienced member on the board, though, and sort of unique, I would think, in these days in Premier League football, in that a genuine supporter from the city, stood on the terraces as a lad, and had supported and followed the club all his life.
Well, it's iconic, isn't it, when you think of, he joined the board in 1989, he became deputy chairman in 1994, obviously before coming full chairman in 2004. When you look back now, that's just never going to happen again, is it? When you're not going to see someone go from 1989 becoming a board member. So it was 1999 when he became deputy chairman, and 2004 when he replaced Sir Philip Carter as chairman. That just doesn't happen in football anymore. You don't see someone go from the boys' pen to the boardroom the way Bill Kenwright did.
No. It was a conversation. Dr. David France called me last night, and we've got that article coming up later. He pays tribute to his friend of 30 years, Bill Kenwright, and his generosity as he speaks about him. But yeah, very much the last of that kind, I suppose. Jack Walker, ironically in 1995, the year of Everton's last major trophy, the FA Cup, Blackburn Rovers won the Premier League, and he was kind of like the last of the local boy done good, in that a businessman who'd followed his hometown team like that Bill did with Everton, who'd obviously bankrolled Blackburn Rovers to the Premier League title, and that was the kind of the end of that. And that was the thing for Bill Kenwright. He could never do that by his own admission of it. He was a wealthy man compared to you and I and many other Evertonians. Being a millionaire is not enough in the Premier League now. Even being a billionaire sometimes isn't enough now in the Premier League, as Farhad Moshiri has seen. So it's certainly the last one of his kind in that respect, and that was the great challenge for him, and I think that was a big part of his downfall, really, in that he knew he didn't have the personal wealth to sort of move and shake and make those decisions, to make Everton great again, because unfortunately, not only is he the longest serving chairman, he's also been at the club for the longest period in the club's entire history without a major trophy, and that must have hurt him as well. That he they've talked about, the infamous line, the good times, and there were certainly after he appointed David Moyes, we can go on to that, the number of successful seasons, relatively successful, and that they were punching above their weight, but he knew he didn't have the financial clout, and hence why he had felt the need to find a new backer, and that exhaustive search, which took him many years, took him to Farhad Moshiri, and as we all know, that hasn't worked out as Mr Moshiri or Bill Kenwright or any Evertonian would have liked.
Obviously we will come on to the David Moyes era and Kenwright's legacy in terms of football, but just looking at the tributes that have come in for Bill Kenwright since the news of his passing, which broke just shortly after 5 o'clock on Tuesday evening, they flooded in, and you can just see, can't you, from the warmth, Everton players past and present, other football clubs, other football administrators, and of course the world of arts and theatre, because obviously he was a huge player now, and probably I think for a wider football fan base, people quite don't understand just how big of a player he actually was in West End and theatre production. You see Wayne Rooney, Duncan Ferguson, Paul Gascoigne, people of that ilk, paying tribute to Kenwright, and they all follow a similar theme of they thank him for the support that he gave, because anyone connected to Everton Football Club who wore that royal blue shirt, past or present, he had a warm for, and he wants them to do well. Yeah,
I think that's the one thing nobody, even his fiercest critic, could deny, that he was one of them when it came to Evertonians. He was a true blue. He's not some Johnny come lately. This has been his whole life, from being Dave Hickson, his boyhood idol in the 1950s, the Cannonball Kid, following him through. Obviously there were successful times in the 60s and 80s, and then obviously the tougher times of late when he was at the helm. But yeah, that, like you say, those huge list of former players, and I think it was his hands-on approach for a long time. I mean, the club spoke about, even this year when he was in poor health, and all the off the field sort of turbulence going around the club, he was fulfilling his chairman's duties right until the end, I think right up until the summer. So it was that hands-on approach, and perhaps that was the thing, sort of like a double-edged sword for him in the end, because I think it would have been best for all parties, including Bill himself, if he'd let go at an earlier time. But it meant so much to him. He was so passionate about it, and that's the way he was with the players. He'd arm around the shoulder, the famous son, the greeting that he would invariably give to everybody. He wanted to be in the thick of things, and it's really genuine, that warmth that former players. Mikel Arteta as well was asked about it in his Arsenal press conference after the game last night, and it is a genuine warmth towards him, because you could feel the passion that he had for Everton and for the city. We move on to that as well, obviously the Hillsborough stuff there and with Liverpool, but yeah, wherever he did, he wanted to be there in the forefront of it, and just a great presence around people, and you could sort of feel, whether it was for the theatre, the arts or Everton Football Club, you'd feel those passions coming from him.
Obviously you say there in terms of the city as a whole, and one thing I'm writing today for tomorrow's paper is almost around the kind of behind the figure of a man who couldn't let go of the football club, which we will come on to shortly, was also a man who just wanted the best for people in life, and done his bit to make sure that people had the best. And you look at, like, not just the Hills, but the speech, but the Bradley Lowry Foundation, who've come out and explained the lengths, that the great lengths that Bill went to make sure that they're okay while Bradley was alive, and sadly when Bradley passed away, and knew that charity donations and fundraisers and that have come to light since, that he made large contributions to, effectively, without PR, without press, without the cameras, on the quiet, because he just wants to do the right thing and give people a good chance of succeeding in life. And for me, there's no other greater moment than when he stood in front of the Kop as Everton chairman and addressed those in attendance for the Hillsborough Memorial service, and he come out with that phrase, they didn't just pick on the wrong seats, they picked on the wrong mums, because that's a phrase that resonates with anyone, whether you're a football fan, Everton fan, Liverpool fan, or just someone going about one day business who has no interest in sport. Yeah,
I mean, it could have been a tough gig for an Everton chairman going to Anfield,
especially as well when the months after he lost his own mum, and he referenced that at the start.
Yeah, I mean, she's a force of nature as well, and a more light-hearted moment, of course, with Wayne Rooney's transfer from from Everton to Manchester United, where Alex Ferguson talks about Bill handing the receiver over to his mother, and talk about Scouse mums and Scouse nans or whatever. But even Fergie got a bit of a verbal battering from old Mrs. Kenwright there about when she said, "Don't you be taking my boy," referring to Wayne Rooney, not Bill, of course. But yeah, that's obviously famous day at Anfield, and our Liverpool reporter Ian Doyle mentions that in the spread in the Echo today. Like I said, could have been a tough gig in terms of how's that going to go down as an Everton chairman speaking at Anfield, which is the most emotional moment for Liverpool fans. But you've got to remember, 89, the same year that obviously Bill came onto the board, was the year of Hillsborough, and that, for me personally, that's my first derby memory, is the derby after Hillsborough when Everton played Liverpool. It was Liverpool's first competitive game back in action after Hillsborough, and the scarves, the blue and red scarves intertwined around the perimeter at Goodison Park for that game, and Bill actually talked about his feeling. Everton obviously had won their semi-final. I think it was when which we played at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, certainly on the same day, of course, when the two semi-finals in 89 in the FA Cup, and obviously Forest against Liverpool up at Hillsborough, and then Everton were down at Villa Park playing Norwich City in their semi-final. And not like today where everything's the instant news, it was slowly filtering through what was going on in South Yorkshire, and he said that any sort of joy that Evertonians had for reaching the FA Cup final quickly evaporated. He said, I think his quote was, "We felt like we got relegated because of the tragic news that was coming through from Hillsborough." And then obviously spoke so eloquently and so passionately at Anfield, that memorial service, all those years later. Him and Andy Burnham as well, of course, two Blues there, who's obviously showing that, for all the, and we saw that at the weekend for the Merseyside derby again, for all the differences, the passions that it arouses, and quite rightly so. I mean, not always in the way it sort of rears its head now, but there's nothing wrong with passion and a rivalry to want to beat your neighbours. But when, that's just a natural sporting state of mind, but when Liverpool is together and the community supports each other, and that's when it's strongest, and in adversity, and all those lies and the things that were said about the Liverpool fans at that time, and it took a long time to sort of change that public opinion, and obviously with the inquiry that came on all those years later. But then, yeah, the way he spoke about that, I mean, I think he earned a lot of respect, like I say, across the city, and certainly across Stanley Park on that occasion, and I think a lot of people are quite rightly remembering that now. And obviously we also had the stuff at Goodison with the memorial there, which was unveiled on the park end, and then it was Bill's own personal choice to play the Hollies song, "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother," when the news filtered through about it. I think it was that day, about the inquiry and the fact that it wasn't the Liverpool fans who were to blame, and as they'd always done. And I think younger fans who weren't around at the time of Hillsborough, and we see this not just with Everton and Liverpool, but with general football fans. We saw it with that awful thing with the Manchester United fan and the shirt he wore, and obviously that went to court earlier this year. But those younger fans who weren't around and don't remember that time, remember that the support that Everton Football Club always gave Liverpool from day one, and I think possibly the first scarf on the cop afterwards was a blue one, and it's always been there, and I think that we'd all do well to remember that.
I think one comment that Bill did make in that speech at Anfield was, which resonates with me, because it was something I remember when I grew up, and you start to learn about these things obviously as a much younger person, and obviously wasn't around then, but it was when he said, about it could have been us. If the balls would have come out differently, because I remember, talking to my granddad who was at Villa Park watching Everton that day, and my uncle was with him, and my nan was at home, and again, she was at the radio on, and he said, there's been trouble at a football match, and he didn't know which one it was and stuff like that. But my granddad often said it could have been, that could have been us, we could have been at Hillsborough that day, if things would have been different. And that's the thing, it's, not just as a chairman, as a director, as an owner of a football club as Bill was then, that was as every Everton fan that day coming back from Villa Park looked at us, that could have been us, it was just the way the draw landed, essentially, how things turned out differently. But obviously as a football man and a football person, Bill obviously sacked Walter Smith And obviously, I think everyone agreed at the time that Walter ran at end of his course as Everton manager. Obviously, a 3-0 defeat at Middlesbrough sparked the end of his tenure.
Yeah.
Appointed David Moyes, a young up-and-coming manager at Preston North End at the time, who, when you look back, was extremely young when he was given the Everton job. And I think it's quite often overlooked how young David Moyes actually was when he landed the Everton gig. But one of the biggest things for me is Bill Kenwright, because when you look at modern day football now, and we've seen it before, Moshiri obviously in charge of trigger-happy owners. Everton and Bill Kenwright enjoyed a lot of success under David Moyes in terms of punching above the weight, the European runs, stuff like that. But that would not have been possible if Bill Kenwright hadn't showed David Moyes some of the patience that he did do in them early years when it was tough and results weren't great, and there was a few finishes. I think the one maybe finished 17th.
Yeah.
He stuck by Moyes because he knew he had a gem, and he gave him the time to build something. And you look now and you think, in today's world, Moyes maybe would have lasted 2 years.
Yeah. If that's not a warning and a sort of a lesson to learn with Everton on the 8th manager in 7 years under Farhad Moshiri now, I don't know what is. Obviously, other than Harry Catterick, David Moyes, the longest continuous spell as Everton manager. Obviously, Howard Kendall was over 3 separate spells, but over 11 years in the job, and he had to be doing more right than wrong to continue that. But like you say, Conor, it was tough times in the beginning. Okay, he did well, kept Everton up in that first season. Yeah, I think he was 38, just shy of 39 when he took over. Kendall and Dalglish were even younger in the 80s, but certainly as an Everton manager, he wasn't that much older than some of the senior players. And he had that good first season. Rooney's first season when he finished 7th, probably should have finished 6th, but did well, finished 7th. And then the following year, just the wheels came off. It was weird. I remember watching that season, and Everton they weren't even in serious relegation danger. They got themselves safe about Easter time and then just collapsed, and they ended up finishing 17th with 39 points, which until a year ago was their lowest points total in the club's history, and obviously been superseded unfortunately by last season's. But there was talk that Moyes had lost the dressing room, and other owners or chairmen could have easily have pulled the trigger. It would have been
in today's world he probably would have pulled the trigger, wouldn't he? In today's world, the way it's gone, given
that Moyes didn't have the credit in the bank, he'd had one decent season and they thought, maybe this hasn't worked out. And all the murmurs, they finished with a 5-1 defeat at Manchester City on the last day, and it just then obviously Rooney left that summer as well. That was the infamous one with Sir Alex Ferguson on the phone, and wasn't much money around the club either. So it would have been a really difficult period, but he stuck with David Moyes and he reaped those rewards. I mean, against all the odds, surprised the footballing world with Everton's highest ever Premier League finish the following year. They finished 4th, got into the Champions League, albeit very briefly. We all know Villarreal, Luis and Chiellini, but then I think under Moyes, was it something like about, 8 or 9 top half finishes out of 11 years for a team. We've got to remember they've only finished in the top half at a table once in the decade before Moyes came in. So Kenwright was rewarded with that stability that he brought, not only in his appointment in David Moyes in the first place, very much seemed like the right fit, but he was a manager without any Premier League experience at that time. But the young hungry players and the ethos that he brought at the club, and then sticking with him and rewarded with that continuity, which is in stark contrast to the churn that we've had, and obviously the wasting of resources in recent years, then followed by having to draw in the horns and spend very little because of financial fair play restrictions now. So in a way, appointing Moyes and then sticking with him were probably testaments to two of the best things that Bill Kenwright ever did.
Obviously, which leads us on to February 2016, when Bill Kenwright achieved what I think was his ultimate goal all along, and that was to get a billionaire to take over the club and to fund the club and take the club to the next level, because like we've alluded to, he knew himself that he didn't have the money, the capital, the resource to get Everton to that next level and to get Everton competing at the ends in which Bill Kenwright wanted the club to be competing at, which is obviously the top ends. Farhad Moshiri comes in, what's seen as a great bit of optimism, I think, for the football club. We were all excited by the prospect of a billionaire coming in and splashing the cash, and obviously in the first few years there was plenty of cash splashed. But obviously, unfortunately, as things have turned out over time, it was possibly the wrong billionaire for Bill Kenwright, and things have quite not been the same since.
Yeah, it's strange because you've got to divide. Basically, there's the stadium and then there's everything else.
Well, we are going to come on to the stadium,
Yeah,
so don't...
so we'll go on to the stadium then. If we're talking about everything else then, yeah, I mean, it hasn't worked out how Farhad Moshiri would have liked, how Bill Kenwright would have liked, and certainly how Evertonians would have liked. This was, I mean, Moyes had that famous quote, didn't he, about trying to compete with the riches of Manchester City and taking a knife to a gunfight, and although he actually had a bit of an Indian sign over City for a time when Everton used to beat them, but he was talking about how he could never, he'd always struggle getting like a centre forward, wouldn't he? Big money, ironically, then Martinez comes in and gets Romelu Lukaku, but yeah, Everton sort of punched above their weight for over a decade there, and then this was the opportunity then to sort of bridge that gap. I always talked about banging their head on that glass ceiling, and this was Everton going to compete now, but yeah, careful what you wish for, and all those years of prudence and sort of good housekeeping under Moyes was thrown out the window there with reckless spending. Farhad Moshiri's admitted himself, we have not always spent large amounts of money wisely, and that's an understatement if there ever was one. So I'm sure it was tough, and we've got to remember though, as much as they were close allies, and I've heard it's been described to me as almost like a relationship between two brothers, two siblings. There could be a bit of squabbling and not always see eye to eye, Moshiri and Kenwright, but ultimately cordial and that sort of family feel. And Farhad Moshiri has obviously paid his respects to Bill Kenwright in the last 24 hours, very heartfelt as well. But what Kenwright would do, he would, well, my understanding, in some of the owner's more capricious moments, how he would change his mind, or maybe make you think one thing was happening and go another way, or have somebody in his ear maybe offering something. Kenwright had that experience, that football knowledge. Farhad Moshiri, very enthusiastic football fan. Why else would he invest hundreds of millions of pounds of his own money in there? But I don't think he had the understanding of football that somebody, Bill Kenwright, with his grounding at Everton as well, a lifetime with him watching the game at Goodison Park would have. And sometimes in the moments, like I don't think Kenwright wanted Allardyce, but obviously got over Farhad Moshiri, sort of overruled him on that one, and went with that appointment. He didn't want Benitez either, by my understanding. He felt, whatever you thought of Benitez's managerial record, his former employment at Liverpool, made him not the right candidate in the chairman's eyes. And then Sean Dyche, the current manager, ironically, was actually one who I understand Bill Kenwright pushed for.
A driving force.
Yeah, 2017 when Koeman was sacked and they did go for Allardyce. I think that might have been one of Bill's choices then, but finally got him earlier this year. And you've got to remember that I think within the Moshiri camp was pushing for Bielsa, and as much as he is a spectacular coach, maybe El Loco wouldn't have been the right choice for Everton at that time. Certainly, if we're led to believe he wanted to look after the under-21s till the end of the season. So we've got to remember that in many ways he was the grounding force and some sort of almost like the voice of reason and of more sort of football nous, when Mr. Moshiri was having some of his flights of fancy or more sort of eccentric moments. So yeah, that dynamic will obviously end. Obviously Mr. Moshiri's one-to-way owner now. He's agreed to deal with 777 and wants to get out of the club before the end of the year. So Bill was seemingly always on his way anyway, in terms of even if he was in good health, in terms of his own position at the club. But it was interesting dynamic, but yeah, unfortunate for all parties, and it just makes it very sad because, again, whatever you think of Bill Kenwright, same as all Evertonians, this if you take his health out of the equation, this last year must have been very tough for him, and it can't have been easy, obviously, having to stay away and not attend those matches, and the relationship with Moshiri certainly would have had its ups and downs.
I think as well it's one of them, isn't it, the sense of the last year, as you say, has been tough. It felt in it from the Crystal Palace game onwards, when Everton survived in the 21-22 season. That was when the pressure really started to mount, and perhaps died down a little bit when Frank Lampard looked like he was getting the tune out of the team, but obviously that fatal night against Brighton at the start of January, which was the really beginning of the end for not just Frank Lampard but for Everton's season almost, in how it nearly played out. If Abdoulaye Doucouré doesn't score against Bournemouth, obviously after that he was told to stay away from Goodison Park. He didn't then attend again, and I think ultimately for Bill, he paid the ultimate price of holding on to something for too long, because perhaps maybe, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, of course, you know, he should have let go and relinquished his role as chairman and maybe took a back seat. But like you've just alluded to there, Chris, I think the fear of Moshiri perhaps doing something wild and off the cuff, because like we've seen, you know, he's been capable of doing stuff that have been perhaps a little bit wild, like appointing referee says as Everton manager, perhaps was the reason why Bill didn't quite feel he could let go and he couldn't take a back seat, because he wanted to still have that little bit of control and that vested interest to make sure that the right thing was being done. But now obviously we've seen today Seamus Coleman and Sean Dyche have paid tribute. They've laid a wreath outside Goodison Park outside the Dixie Dean statue. More tributes are expected to be paid obviously when Everton played their first home match since Bill's passing on Wednesday against Burnley. But of course this Sunday Everton are at West Ham, and it's quite perhaps ironic bit of fate that the team Everton come up against is managed by the team who's most synonymous in Everton and Bill Kenwright, and that's David Moyes. Yeah,
of course. I mean, of course, as well, last season, as we talked about, the game that all the Everton board were there en masse again. Farhad Moshiri attending his first and only game since that game at Watford, which is now over 2 years ago. Bill was there. Director of Football Kevin Felber was there. Denise Barris-Baxendale was there. Graham Sharp was there. They were all there en masse before the axe fell on Frank Lampard. And what was sort of ironic that day, West Ham United were paying tribute to their own homegrown owner, David Gold, who would have possibly been the closest equivalent to Kenwright in terms
they were big friends. They were close friends, weren't they, as well?
In terms of being a lifelong local fan of that club. So we talked about Kenwright being the last of his kind. Perhaps David Gold was the penultimate one in that type of owner. So yeah, West Ham United were paying their own passionate and very sort of heartfelt tributes to David Gold that day, and then obviously the axe fell on Frank Lampard after that one. But in terms of David Moyes, I'm sure when he feels the time is right ahead of this game, he'll be playing his tribute, because obviously Bill was the man who brought him to Goodison Park, and as we've already said, kept him in that position for so long, worked alongside him, and obviously they was a great supporter of him, and they probably wanted him to come back. I think Moyes has spoken about that more than once already. You know, there have been opportunities, certainly before Carlo Ancelotti was appointed, for him to come back, and I suspect the chairman would have been one of his strong supporters in that respect. I mean, a certain amount of romanticism. I mean, I always say don't go back. I mean, ironically, Moyes is in his second spell at West Ham, albeit after a very short first spell. But I mean, I know at various junctures, perhaps the chairman would have liked to have seen a David Unsworth or a Duncan Ferguson in the hot seat, and maybe that's sort of the times when his heart was ruling his head on occasions. But yeah, you could never sort of dispute that passion and that genuine love that he had for the football club, and whether he was able to carry out things or not, you know, it shaped his every decision that he just wanted to do what was best for Everton, and including that would be bringing in Farhad Moshiri when he did that.
I think you're right, Chris. I think it was a sad day and an end of an era, I think, on Tuesday for Everton Football Club. And for anyone who's not seen today's paper, it is blue rather than red. Blue Bill has got the blue echo that he probably always craved, if we're being honest. But we will, of course, be back on Friday to look ahead to that game on Sunday against West Ham United, and, of course, continue the tributes that are expected to continue to flood in for Bill Kenwright following his sad passing on Tuesday evening. But, Chris, thank you very much for joining me for today, and we will be back on Friday for the next episode of the Real Blue Podcast.